This video is sponsored by War Thunder. There is something quite exciting about the early betas of Counter-Strike. It was exciting at the time when there was nothing else quite like it, and it's still exciting now with the knowledge of what the game would eventually become. I still get giddy at the sights and sounds of Half-Life 1, which for me was one of the first times gaming ever broke out of the sci-fi corridor mazes of yore and into the realm of airy, realistic, expansive environments, sounds and gameplay. The first betas of Counter-Strike borrow especially heavily from Half-Life, as at this time that would have been the assets available to the mappers, and any custom textures or features a rarity. The entire beta period spanned just over a year in length. Some builds were only around for a week or so. And with it, there's this strange disconnect, because although many of the changes and decisions at the time were likely made on the whim or with very little experience by modders barely into their 20s, the lore and trivia for the time has become almost legendary, and there's an air of prophetic wisdom in the beta's patch notes, as we see this mod gradually morph and set into the seemingly steadfast rules that make Counter-Strike the special entity that it is seen as being today. But first, this video's sponsor, War Thunder, which with over 2,500 tanks, planes, ships and helicopters, makes it one of the most comprehensive battle sims of all time, catering for PC users, console users on PlayStation and Xbox, and now even mobile players. With so much history, you can track how vehicular combat has advanced over the ages. Join over 95 million other players in an epic PvP battle today, featuring gorgeous graphics, upscaling support, ray tracing and authentic sound effects, which all help to transport you into the fray but with none of the risks. There is so much content to experience, so much stuff to unlock, you probably won't even have time to appreciate the fantastic optimization and the game's DLSS support, which I love for how it makes the trees and distant details so crystal clear, which is handy when there could be something lurking behind them. Manage to hit an enemy, have your kills rewarded with impressive X-ray damage, simulating in uncanny detail the full extent of the destruction your devastation has wreaked on the machine and its crew. With War Thunder, you can finally discover why every video of mine sponsored by War Thunder takes so long to make, because you two will probably go off on many lengthy tangents to see if the next game you play could be the one where you turn the tide. Maybe next time, and the time after that, and again and again and again. Check out this video's description or pinned comment for a link to play the game for free. And for gamers on PC or console, then use my code and you can get a massive bonus pack featuring 100,000 Silver Lions, 7 days of premium free, experience boosters and much, much more, provided you're a new player or haven't played in the last 6 months. But be quick, all this is around for a limited time only. And have fun! So time to start going through the first of many, many updates the game would go on to receive. These earliest days of Counter-Strike are still accessible online, if you try hard enough, but they require special, super early versions of Half-Life to work, and you must bypass many of the intricate security measures of the time. For instance, the installer for early betas of Counter-Strike don't work because over 30 days have passed since the installer for them was made. That's right, Min used the demo version of these installers. But being the incredible hacker that I am, changing Windows' date back to 1999 overcame all that. But then I ran straight into Half-Life's serial key requirement, though through extensive trial and error, I eventually bypassed that too. My prize? I got to play on an extremely buggy, broken version of Counter-Strike. No bots, very little server support. This is Beta 1, literally the first version ever to be publicly released. It's not even got a number to it, it is just Counter-Strike mod. And it's hideous, but also brilliant. For instance, games at the time didn't use the WASD standard that we all take for granted today. No, the default controls here are W to move forward, mouse 2 to run backwards, and the arrow keys to strafe. What is this, Mezzi setup? In this first beta there is no knife, the Glock can only fire in burst mode, there is no radar or many of the other HUD elements that we have today like the round timer or your money, and the hostages here really do not want to be rescued. I mean, they've always been horrible, but here in Beta 1 they're what can only really be described as discombobulatingly maladroit. Maybe they're also using the default controls. I spent far too long trying to find all 4 of them in this level, but it turns out there's only 3. And even when you do find them, there is no pathfinding. They will block you in corners, they'll get stuck on what little detail there is on the map, and if you press the use button on them again, then they'll run away, plummeting off mountains and so on. But even if by some miracle you do get them to the hostage rescue zone, you have to use the hostage rescue button, which doesn't exist in the control menu, for money that you can't see, and you still won't win the round. Welcome to the very first version of Counter-Strike. Well, the very first publicly released version of Counter-Strike, because the month before, this screenshot was taken, showing a playtesting session hosted on CS Mansion sometime during May 1999. That's a long time ago. To put that into perspective, that same month, NATO aircraft bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, causing diplomatic outrage, a powerful tornado ripped through Oklahoma, killing 40, and Star Wars The Phantom Menace was released. So compared with all those things, this pre-beta version of Counter-Strike wasn't that bad. On this scoreboard you can see Jess Cliff and the Gooseman, aka Min Lee, who are the two main names behind the making of Counter-Strike. And also Magnus, who made this map, Mansion. He too had his roots in Quake 2, but was asked by Cliff if he could make a map for an upcoming mod. Initially he was reluctant, probably because he was taking his exams at the time, but thank goodness he did. The map became a hit, Min liking it for its mixture of outdoor and indoor combat. It was even Heaton's favourite map for a while. And compared with all the other maps in the game at the time, this map was very small, which probably meant the rounds didn't last too long. But it still had to be made before Counter-Strike was even a thing, so it was a very primitive map using Half-Life textures and sporting gameplay that was very unbalanced and weird. There were CCTV cameras the CTs could use to scout out other parts of the level from the safety of their spawn, and the intention with this map was to make a realistic setting, likely inspired by one of the Rainbow Six maps at the time. Problem was, this was probably too realistic because terrorists could simply camp in the mansion, turn all the lights off and hide in a corner somewhere. So the map didn't really lend itself well for strategy. But then, none of the release day maps really did. Another of the release day maps was Weapon Depot, and it was just too large and sprawling. Siege was another, which was also large and sprawling, and pretty much just one long corridor. And Prison, this map featured here, was voted the worst map of all time. Contained 5 hostages, horrible doors you had to wind open to quickly let the hostages through before the doors closed up again, and it contained manable gun turrets which could be used to jib players and assassinate hostages. It's bad. But since all these were made when Counter-Strike wasn't even a thing, it's not surprising that none of these release day maps were what you consider to be viable Counter-Strike material today. But of the bunch, Mansion was, in my opinion, by far the least terrible. And you've also got to bear in mind how things were back in 1999. A world of unpaid, inexperienced hobbyists. A far cry from today's sky-high standards and fierce competition between talented teams of mappers to get their creations featured in the game for considerable financial reimbursement. Back at Counter-Strike's release, there was no financial incentive. Making something was done purely for the love of the game and out of the joy of creation. But despite that, creating a map still took a huge amount of effort and a long time to render, and so to get mappers to dedicate their time to creating something for a mod that didn't even exist was understandably quite a challenge. And yet, come Beta 2, 3 of these 4 original maps were taken out, although Mansion later returned for a while before being superseded by CS Estate, which was similar but superior. The only original map to survive the duration of Counter-Strike's lifespan was CS Siege, which is essentially one long valley with a few underground tunnels. This map received numerous updates to its layout and theme. Though playing the current version featured on the Steam edition of the game, it still feels very much like a super early, unpolished Counter-Strike map to me. Getting a bit ahead of myself here, but Siege even returned for CSGO in 2013, which is now almost exactly halfway between the early betas and this video's release. How time flies. A week after the first release of Counter-Strike, along came CS Beta 1.1. I don't know if it's just the version I've got of it, but it's changed the default name used for players from frickin' moron to beefhole, and the default controls are entirely different but still equally ridiculous. And inverted mouse is used by default. Valve, please fix. And with this Beta 1.1 update, along came 2 new maps, making the total 6. The first of these new maps was CS Desert, which to me feels more like a battlefield map. It's full of large open areas, an open skybox so you can climb up onto the cliffs and stuff. And again, there are mountable gun turrets which here do virtually 0 damage to hostages, and are really inaccurate. As you might imagine, the general consensus was that this map wasn't great, and it was removed come Beta 3. And the other map to be added was CS Assault, which needs no introduction since it's been a staple part of hostage mode for Counter-Strike right up until its removal in 2023 with the release of Counter-Strike 2. Gone, but not yet forgotten. I used this opportunity to scout about the very first version of this map, and I noticed a few changes to it. The ladder placements outside of changed with every version of the game, but here the vent system is also much simpler. And there are 3 CCTVs the CTs can use at their spawn to scout out camping terrorists, which in my opinion is probably quite a handy addition and probably essential in these earliest days for the mod to try and balance the teams. In these early days, there are a few relics from the game's Half-Life roots, like the flashlight, which probably came in handy whenever terrorists switched the lights off in Mansion. I still remember there being a flashlight in the early versions of Counter-Strike Source, and I was lighting up bump-mapped surfaces in 2005 and 2006. And the other weird option back in the betas was the choice between realistic and normal full damage. Allow me to demonstrate the difference between these by hurling myself off the side of this ravine. This is with default full damage, 2 damage, and this is it with realistic. Yep, apparently it's realistic to explode when you hit the floor. So let's try it from halfway down. Nope, still exploding. Now I get the need for realism, but this is probably taking it a little bit too far. Misjudge a small ladder or the side of a crate, and realistic full damage will seriously fuck you up, especially in a game like this where you can't heal and where you remain dead for a while. I suspect that given that Counter-Strike was meant to be realistic, having to tone down the full damage was one of the first tough compromises that had to be made in the name of actually being fun. Also, you might have noticed that when I die, I drop a weapon box containing my last used weapon and remaining ammo. This was a feature exclusive to Beta 1 of the game, and similar to how Half-Life Deathmatch worked at the time, but it did mean that if you collected several of these from fallen bodies, you could potentially arm yourself with multiple guns in a way which couldn't be equipped at the same time from using the buy menus. Imagine that in today's Counter-Strike. You could have an M4 and an AWP, and a Nova shotgun, just for lols. The Counter-Strike experience evolved quite considerably over the course of Beta 1. I'll just give you a whistle-stop tour of how the experience might have changed had you been playing the game in the first few months after its initial release. Picture the scene. Beta 1.0, with rounds lasting 8 whole minutes, the game featuring a barely working economy, a text-based buy menu, no knife, a Glock that could only burst fire, and hostages who really don't want to be rescued. Within the first 2 months, Beta 1 became Beta 1.1, and then Beta 1.2 or 1.9, depending on what you want to call it, which then itself received a patch before Beta 2 finally rolled out. And what I find most amusing in these earliest of patch notes is that it wasn't really building upon the game itself as much as it was all about limiting how much grief its player base could inflict upon itself. Within weeks of the game's release, a friendly fire admin command was introduced. Team balancing was soon forced to prevent everybody from, I don't know, joining terrorists and camping. Vote kick was soon added, and cheats were soon disabled. Some good ideas right there. And a 5-second buy time was added for people to buy weapons in without being rushed at the very start of the round. But this wasn't called a buy time, this was initially called the molasses period. I think these updates all paint a pretty vivid picture of the hideous state of early Counter-Strike antics that people got up to, but you bet they had fun. Oh, and the round time was soon dropped from 8 minutes down to just 5.5 minutes, which is still much longer than we're used to today, but I can only imagine how awful it must have been before that change with all the camping going on across these huge maps. So the earliest updates all seem to be about fixing ways in which the game was being abused, though it did also get a few general gameplay tweaks. Interestingly, some mechanics were nailed pretty much straight away, like the introduction of a salary cap, which was first set to $12,000, and then the very next day to $16,000, which is the same as it is today. And the prices for some of the weapons changed quite considerably too. Interestingly, the MP5 and TMP were updated to be priced more or less in line with what we know them as costing in today's Counter-Strike. But the shotgun started cheap at $1,250, but then was raised to $2,000 for Beta 1.2 or 1.9 or whatever. Whereas today, the Nova shotgun is priced in Counter-Strike at just $1,050. But that doesn't mean that it was the wrong price in the betas. I'm a big believer that even if nothing about a game changes, the players playing the game can still change and adapt to the point where the game is no longer balanced. So the early update to raise the price of the shotgun to $2,000 could be an interesting reflection of player preference and how bad people were at aiming at the time, especially with pings like these. It seems like flashbangs required several buffs in the first month of the game's release, and the Kevlar vest was quickly made more effective by covering the arms as well. Note that the helmet wasn't even an option. That was rolled out for Beta 3. And just so you know, the Glock did get a single fire mode a week after the first release come Beta 1.1, with burst fire relegated to mouse button 2, or 3, or enter, or whatever stupid button it was set to at the time. So making this video has shown me that covering the earliest versions of Counter-Strike cannot be done in a vacuum. The most interesting things about these early betas are only interesting with the power of hindsight, and thus I felt the need to travel forward from time to time to reveal when things in these early betas stopped being how they were. But I think it is finally time to say goodbye to the game's first beta and to move on to the first sensibly named update. Beta 2. And again, thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring my content and for enabling my obsession with comparing different versions of Counter-Strike in very, very weird ways. War Thunder is free to play on PC, Xbox, PlayStation and mobile. Just check out the links in this video's description, and if you're new or returning after 6 months of inactivity on PC or console, you can claim the massive bonus pack for premium vehicles and other goodies. But be quick, it's around for limited time only.